My name is Margot. Margot Louise Hale, which my mother chose because she'd read a novel with a Margot in it and liked the sound of it, and which my father immediately shortened to Marg, which I hated from the time I was old enough to have opinions about things like that. My sister's name is Vanessa Claire Hale, and no one shortened it. No one would have dreamed of shortening it. Vanessa was a name you said in full, deliberately. The way you say the name of something you consider precious. We grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois, 25 miles outside Chicago, on a street called Birchwood Court that had 6 other houses on it, and an HOA that my father complained about constantly, but always complied with. My father, Kenneth, managed the parts department at an automotive distributor. My mother, Susan, did substitute teaching on and off for most of my childhood, though the on and off pattern seemed to correspond closely with how much energy was left after Vanessa's schedule. Vanessa's schedule. I need to try to explain this without making it sound like a grievance list, because I've spent enough years sorting through which parts of my childhood were genuinely injurious and which parts were ordinary family noise that I gave too much weight to. But the schedule, the architecture of our entire family life around Vanessa, was something real and documented, and persistent enough that even now, if I close my eyes, I can reconstruct any given week of my childhood through the lens of where Vanessa needed to be. She was beautiful, first. That mattered in the specific way it matters in families where one child gets the physical luck and the other one doesn't, which is to say it mattered enormously without ever being directly discussed. Vanessa had my mother's coloring, dark hair, pale skin, the kind of face that photographed easily, and by the time she was 7 or 8 she had the quality that some children have of seeming lit from within. People responded to her. Strangers at grocery stores told my mother she should be in commercials. Teachers remembered her name before the first week was out. I was sandy-haired and gap-toothed until I was 11. With my father's long nose and a way of looking at people with too much intensity that adults sometimes found unsettling, I was smart. I don't say that with ego. I say it because it's the true thing about me that was closest to the surface as a child, the quality that should have counted. That in a more equitable arrangement would have been celebrated the way Vanessa's beauty was celebrated. In our house it was mostly unremarked upon. I remember being 8 years old and bringing home a reading assessment, a level assigned by my teacher, Ms. Petrakis, that was 3 full grades above my actual grade. My mother looked at it and said, "Oh, that's good," and then turned to ask Vanessa whether she'd told her dance teacher about the recital date change. I remember the specific weight of that "oh." I remember it because I stored it. I stored all of them. Not bitterly, or not mostly bitterly. Children store things because storage is how they make sense of their world, and the thing I was making sense of was, what I bring home does not create the same response as what Vanessa brings home. That was a fact, like a math fact, provable and repeatable. By the time I was 10 and Vanessa was 13, the shape of our family was clear. My parents adored both of us. I want to be careful to say that, because I believe it's true. They loved me. But with Vanessa they were lit up. She activated something in them, some particular pride and pleasure, that I simply did not activate. My accomplishments were received. Hers were celebrated. My needs were met. Hers were anticipated. I had friends. I had teachers I liked. A particular fondness for Miss Petrakis and a 6th grade history teacher named Mr. Dahl, who assigned us a research project on anything we wanted and told me, when I turned in 40, 2 pages on the economic causes of the First World War, that I had the makings of a serious mind. I've kept that one next to the one from Mixter. Okay for. I've kept things like it, the small moments when a person outside my family looked directly at what I was and named it correctly. Those moments are what you live on when your own household isn't providing enough light. Vanessa danced. Competitively, seriously. With the kind of commitment that required my parents to drive her to studios 3 evenings a week and every Saturday, to travel to regional competitions in Milwaukee and Indianapolis and once, memorably, Kansas City, to buy costumes and pay coaching fees and sit through 4-hour recitals with the focused attention of people watching something sacred unfold. I went to those recitals. Every one, for 8 years. I sat in auditorium seats next to my parents and watched my sister move across stages. And she was good. She was genuinely good, the kind of dancer who makes you feel the music differently. And I was glad for her, or tried to be, though gladness and longing lived very close together in those auditorium seats. When the family budget got tight, my father's company went through a rough patch when I was about 12. Some restructuring that reduced his hours for almost a year. There were conversations at the kitchen table about what could be adjusted. Vanessa's studio fees were not adjusted. The family vacation was. My after-school science club, which cost $40 a semester, was paused. My parents said they'd reinstate it when things evened out. It took 2 years. In that time, Vanessa's coaching upgraded to a more expensive studio because her previous instructor said she had outgrown the program. I'm not telling you this to prosecute my parents. I'm telling you because the pattern matters. The pattern is the story. The college conversation started my sophomore year of high school. I was 15, Vanessa was 18 and a senior. And the kitchen table became a planning room for her future with an urgency and thoroughness that I watched from a slight remove. The way you watch a production being staged around you. Vanessa wanted to study performance. Dance, theater, the kind of conservatory program that was intensely competitive and intensely expensive. My parents visited 4 schools with her in the spring. My father researched financial aid. My mother organized a spreadsheet. They discussed, in voices that traveled through my bedroom wall on Wednesday evenings, what they were willing to allocate, what loans they'd take, what family money might be available. Vanessa got into a program in Chicago. Expensive, private. Everything she'd wanted. My parents sat her down and told her with unmistakable pride that they'd found a way to make it work. My mother cried. My father said he was the proudest he'd ever been. Vanessa went to school in the fall. I moved into her larger bedroom, which my parents allowed because she wasn't using it, and spent the next 2 years doing what I'd been doing for most of my life, working hard and largely without acknowledgement. I was good at school in the specific way that doesn't get celebrated on refrigerators. I wasn't a brilliant performer. I didn't raise my hand constantly or win school awards. I just worked, steadily and seriously, with a consistency that several teachers recognized, but that didn't translate into the visible, shareable proof of excellence that gets noticed at family dinners. I wanted to study economics. I'd known since about sophomore year when Mr. Dowell's assignment had branched into broader, reading about systems and markets, and the structural logic of how resources moved through the world. I wanted to understand that. I was good at understanding it. By junior year, I was taking AP Economics and Statistics simultaneously and scoring in the top percentile in both. I applied to 7 schools. My first choice was the University of Chicago, which had one of the best economics programs in the country, and which was, as it happened, in the same city as Vanessa's conservatory. I got in. I came home from school on a Thursday in late March and found the letter. Actual paper letter. This was a long time ago, and I opened it standing in the front hallway with my backpack still on, and I read the first line, and I sat down on the floor. The University of Chicago, full consideration for merit aid, detailed in a supplemental letter. One of the great academic institutions in the world had decided I belonged there. My mother got home 40 minutes later. I showed her the letter. She said, "Oh my goodness, Margot, that's wonderful." She hugged me. She meant it. "We'll have to call your father." We called my father. He said, "Chicago, that's impressive. Isn't that where Vanessa is?" That was the conversation. Not, I want to be precise here, that it was a bad conversation. It was a fine conversation. My mother was warm. My father was proud, in the general way he was proud of me. But I had just gotten into the University of Chicago, and the first observation was geographic proximity to my sister, and I want to name that. Clearly and without drama, because it is the kind of thing that is easy to miss and easy to dismiss, and which is nevertheless, accumulated over 17 years, a thing that shapes a person. The money conversation happened about 3 weeks later. My father sat down with me, which I remember clearly because he initiated it, which was unusual, and explained that they were very proud of me and wanted to support my education, but that things were complicated. The word complicated. I asked him to be specific. He said Vanessa's program had been more expensive than projected. He said he and my mother had taken out loans they hadn't anticipated. He said the merit aid from Chicago would help but wouldn't be enough, and they were looking at what else could be done. But I should also look seriously at loans. I said, "How much did Vanessa's school cost?" He looked slightly uncomfortable. He named a number. I said, "And the merit aid from Chicago reduces my cost too." He told me. I did the math in my head. They had spent more on Vanessa's conservatory, in total projected cost through graduation, than my Chicago education would cost me even before merit aid. The gap was substantial. And the solution being offered to me, for the school that was harder to get into and more academically prestigious by every available metric, was that I should consider loans. I said, "Okay." He said, "You're not upset?" I said, "No, Dad. I was 18. I didn't have the language yet for what I was." What I was something beyond upset. Something that had moved through upset and come out the other side into a cold, clear place where I could see the shape of the whole thing very plainly. I went to Chicago. I took loans. Federal ones, the maximum I was eligible for. I got a part-time job in the university library. Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings, shelving and research assistance, that paid modestly and gave me unlimited access to every academic database the university subscribed to, which was, for my purposes, a form of wealth. I want to tell you about Chicago the way it actually was rather than the way people imagine it. When you say University of Chicago Economics Program, it was not glamorous. It was not the movie version of elite academia with brilliant students lounging on lawns having elegant arguments. It was hard. It was relentlessly, specifically hard in a way that required me to become more serious and more rigorous than I had been, which I hadn't thought was possible. I loved it. I had a professor in my first year, Dr. Emmeline Voss, labor economics, a small German, American woman who wore the same style of dark blazer every day and had the directest eye contact of anyone I'd encountered, who handed back my first midterm with a note clipped to it that said, "You think in systems. That is not common. Don't waste it." I did not waste it. By sophomore year, I was in a research seminar that was technically for graduate students. By junior year, I was doing independent study with a visiting professor from London whose work on wage inequality I'd been reading since I was 16. By senior year, I had a thesis that was recommended for departmental honors and a tentative offer, pending graduation, from a boutique economic consulting firm in Chicago that worked with municipalities and nonprofits on budget and policy analysis. I graduated in May. My parents came. Vanessa came. We had dinner afterward at a restaurant downtown, and my mother said she was proud, and my father said he was impressed, and Vanessa, who was 25 and had finished her conservatory program and was teaching dance to children at a studio in Evanston, told me she'd always known I'd do something smart. It was fine. It was a fine evening. What I noticed was what I always noticed, the fineness, the adequacy of it. The way my accomplishments, even large ones, were received warmly and basically, and then the conversation moved on, whereas I remembered, still, the 4-hour recitals, and my mother's tears and my father's voice saying he was the proudest he'd ever been. I moved into an apartment in Logan Square with 2 roommates from college and started the consulting job in June. A year passed. then another. I was good at the work in the way I'd been good at most things. Not flashily, not loudly, but with a depth and consistency that began to compound. The firm worked with city agencies and foundations and mid-sized nonprofits, helping them analyze budget structures and economic impact and resource allocation. And I found that the combination of systems thinking and human scale, the fact that behind every spreadsheet there were actual people whose actual lives were being shaped by how money moved, gave my work a gravity that kept me genuinely engaged. I got promoted at 18 months. My salary, which had started at $58,000, moved to $72,000. I called my parents with some regularity. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional Sunday. My mother asked about work with genuine interest. My father asked if I was seeing anyone. Vanessa called less often. She was busy with the studio, with her social life, with the particular fullness that some people move through the world with. But when she did call, she was warm. And I want to be honest that my relationship with Vanessa was never as simple as the childhood dynamic might suggest. She wasn't cruel. She never gloated. She was, in the way of people who have always been given slightly more than their share, simply unaware that anything had ever been unequal. 3 years after I started at the consulting firm, a client introduced me to someone who changed the direction of everything. Her name was Grace Okonkwo, and she ran an economic policy research center attached to a university in Washington, D.C. She'd hired my firm to do an impact analysis on a housing initiative, and had been in 3 meetings during which she'd asked me, specifically, follow-up questions that I'd answered in ways that seemed to confirm something she'd been thinking. After the 3rd meeting, she asked me to stay behind. She offered me a research position at the center. The salary was a step down. I want to be honest about that. It was a meaningful step down, from 72 to 61, and I sat with it seriously for 2 weeks before I said yes. What I was saying yes to was proximity to the work I actually cared about, to the people who were doing it at the level where it was changing things, and to Grace, who had the particular quality of some leaders where being in her presence made you want to be better at what you were already good at. I moved to D.C. in the fall. I found an apartment in Petworth, smaller than Logan Square, noisier, with a view of a parking structure that turned out to be fine because I was rarely home during daylight hours. I called my mother from the moving van, and she said she hoped D.C. was safe. My father said I should look into the metro system. Vanessa texted a string of heart emojis. Washington was where I became, in the precise sense of that word, myself. Not all at once. These things are never all at once. They're accumulated, the way the consulting work had been. Through years of showing up and doing the work with full attention, and letting the work be its own justification. I spent 2 years at the research center doing the kind of analysis that most people outside policy circles don't know exists. The work that happens before the headlines, before the legislation, before the programs that get covered and credited. I wrote papers. I testified once in front of a city council committee on housing affordability, and sat at a table with a microphone in front of me and spoke for 12 minutes about structural patterns in municipal budget allocation. And the council member who chaired the committee looked at me afterward and said that was the clearest presentation of that material she'd ever heard. Grace promoted me, then promoted me again. I was 29 when we spun out of the university structure into an independent organization. Grace was the founding director. She asked me to be deputy director. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I need to stop here and be transparent about something, because I think it matters. When I say we grew, I don't mean in the dramatic way that startups grow. I don't mean a hockey stick graph. I don't mean a profile in a magazine. I don't mean suddenly and dramatically. I mean the way serious research institutions grow when they're doing work that proves its value over time and attracts funding because the funding sources are smart enough to recognize the value. I mean slowly, consistently, in the specific unglamorous way that things built on intellectual rigor tend to grow. By the time I was 32, our organization had a staff of 22 and a budget of $8 million. My compensation was $136,000. I had authored or co-authored 11 published papers. I had been quoted in national outlets I'd been reading since college. Grace and I had built something real. A small institution with a real reputation doing work that was actually changing how some cities thought about some important problems. I had not been back to Naperville in 2 years, not by design, exactly. I went home for Christmas when I could. I called. I existed in my family's life in the present tense way, the checking in and moving on way. The way you exist in a family where you have never quite learned how to be fully present without also being slightly braced. My mother got sick. Not catastrophically. I want to say that clearly because the story matters and the shape of it matters, and I don't want you to be afraid for her. A cardiac situation that required surgery and a recovery period, significant but ultimately resolved. I flew home the week of the surgery and stayed for 10 days. Sleeping in my old room, the small one, the one I'd moved back into after Vanessa graduated and moved out and took her larger room with her. Being home for that 10 days. The hospital waiting room, the meals at the kitchen table. The long evenings watching my father be afraid in the quiet way he was afraid of things, did something to me that I'm still sorting through. It compacted things. The years of distance, the shape of the family as I'd left it versus the family as I found it, smaller and older and a little fragile around the edges. On the third evening, my father and I sat at the kitchen table after dinner, the way we never quite used to sit, and he said, "Tell me what you're working on. Not how's work. Tell me what you're working on." So I told him. I told him about the housing research, about the methodology we'd developed, about a specific city partnership that I was proud of in the way I'm proud of the things that actually do what they're designed to do. He listened. He asked questions, real questions, the kind that meant he was following rather than waiting to respond. And then he said, very quietly, with his coffee cup in both hands, "I don't think we paid enough attention, Margaret. I didn't say anything," he said, "to you. I think we took it for granted that you were fine." I said, "I was fine," he said. "That's not the same thing, is it?" It wasn't a question. I said, "No, Dad, it's not." We sat there for a while. The refrigerator made its humming sound. My mother was upstairs, recovering. My father and I at the kitchen table having, for the first time in my adult life, a conversation that was not adjacent to the truth, but actually inside it. It wasn't everything. One conversation is not everything, but it was real, and it was his, and I've held on to it. My mother recovered fully. She's fine. She gardens now with a specific ferocity, as though the surgery clarified her priorities, and her roses are legitimately extraordinary. What happened next happened 6 months later. Our organization was invited to present at a major urban policy conference in Chicago, large, well-attended, the kind of event that the field uses as an annual taking of stock. Grace was presenting. I was co-presenting and also receiving, as it turned out. Something I hadn't entirely known was coming. The field's Emerging Leader Award. Given by the conference's academic committee, voted on by a peer panel. Awarded to a researcher under 35 who had demonstrated significant contribution to the discipline. It came with a modest prize and a significant amount of visibility, including a profile in the conference program that went to every attendee. The conference program, it turned out, was also available online, publicly, with a PDF version that circulated reasonably widely. My mother found it. She had been to a local garden club thing. She joined after the surgery. Something to do with her hands and her newly clarified priorities. And one of the women there, whose daughter worked in some corner of policy consulting in Chicago, had come across the conference program and mentioned, at the garden club, that there was a Margot Hale from Naperville in it. My mother came home and found the PDF. She called Vanessa. Vanessa told my father called me. He said, "Margot, your mother found this program, this conference." I said, "The Chicago conference, yes." He said, "You're getting an award." I said, "Yes." He said, "It says here?" And I could hear the paper or the screen, and his voice doing the thing it does when he's reading something carefully. "It says you're one of the leading researchers in your field. It says your work has influenced policy in 7 cities. It says..." He stopped. I waited. He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" And here is what I said. I've thought about this a lot. What I said and why, and whether it was the right thing. I said, "I don't know, Dad." I think I stopped expecting it to land the way it deserved to land, so I stopped announcing it. There was a silence. He said, "That's our fault." I said, "Some of it." He said they wanted to come to the conference. My mother, my father, Vanessa. They wanted to be there. I said I'd get them tickets, which is how I came to be standing in the doorway of a hotel ballroom in Chicago, watching my father's face go pale. Not because I was triumphant. I want to be precise about this. I was not performing my success for them. I was standing in a doorway with the specific weight of someone who has spent a long time being measured by the wrong instruments and has arrived, finally, at a moment when the right instruments are present. My father saw me and went pale, because he recognized something. That is what I said earlier, and it is what I meant. He looked at me and he saw, in one sudden revision, the person I had been becoming for 30 years while he was looking in a slightly different direction. My mother crossed the room. She held my face in both hands. Cold hands, always cold, and she said, "Margot, we are so..." She stopped. I said, "I know, Mom. Vanessa was behind her. Vanessa is not a villain in this story." I need to say that once more emphatically, because she stood there with her dark hair and her 30 years of beautiful daughterlight, and her face did something I'd never seen it do. It went uncertain, not guilty. Vanessa didn't have the framework for guilt about something she'd never been conscious of. Just uncertain, the way a person looks when they're suddenly unsure of the story they've been living in. She said, "Margot, I had no idea." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I'm so proud of you." And she meant it. I could see she meant it, and it was complicated and simple at the same time, the way most things are in families. I hugged her, because she didn't create the dynamic. She inhabited it, the way any child inhabits what's built around them. She had been given more and had not been cruel about it. She had simply not noticed, because the recipients of imbalance rarely do. That was the evening I let most of it go, not because of the award or the room or the visibility of it. Because of my father standing with his coffee at the edge of the ballroom later, quieter than I'd seen him, and putting his hand on my shoulder the way he'd always put it on Vanessa's. Automatic, unconscious, like breathing. And then seeming to notice what he'd done, and leaving it there. Just leaving it there. I went back to D.C. the following Monday. I called my parents that weekend, and the weekend after. And then it became a more reliable rhythm. The calling, the actually talking about what I was working on, the slow revision of what our family was now that the original architecture had been looked at directly. There is one more thing. The following spring, Grace told me she'd been approached about a significant funding opportunity. A foundation that wanted to endo a fellowship program within our organization for early career researchers from under-resourced backgrounds. The kind of researchers who were good enough and driven enough and working without the infrastructure that their potential deserved. She asked me to lead the program design. I thought about it for a long time. About what it should look like, what it should give, what the experience of being taken seriously before you'd had the chance to prove yourself to the people who were supposed to believe in you unconditionally actually meant. I designed the fellowship so that every fellow would be assigned a senior mentor, not a supervisor, a mentor, Someone whose only job was to look at what this person was building and say, I see it. It's real. Keep going. We funded 8 fellows in the first cohort. The night the fellows were announced, I sat in my apartment in Petworth. I had a better view by then, a tree outside the window, remarkable in October, and I thought about a list of people. Miss Petrakis, Mr. Dahl, Dr. Voss with her dark blazer, Grace. The people outside my family, who had looked directly at what I was and named it correctly. I thought about what it had meant to have them, and what it had cost. Every year they weren't there. So, here we are. I've been finding the right way to end this for a while. And what I keep coming back to is not the ballroom, or the award, or my father's hand on my shoulder. It's something smaller and more durable. It's the Wednesday evenings in the university library, the library job. Shelving books in a building full of serious human thought with nowhere to be for 3 hours except present and useful. I love that job in a way I haven't thought about in years. There was a section in the upper stacks. Economic history. A little, visited corner, where the light came through a high window, in a particular way in the late afternoons, and sometimes I'd stop there for a moment on my shelving rote and just stand in it. Not thinking about anything, not building anything, just standing in it. I think about that light sometimes when something gets complicated. When the work is hard or the recognition is slow, or someone underestimates me in the particular practiced way that some people underestimate women who are quiet about what they know. I think about that light, and I remember that it was there whether anyone saw me in it or not. And then I go back to work. What I want to leave you with is this, and I mean it in the most unglamorous, practical way possible. You do not need the room to notice you in order to become who you are becoming. The room noticing is a lovely thing when it happens. My father's face going pale, my mother's cold hands on my face. Those are lovely things. I won't pretend they didn't matter. They mattered. But they were the acknowledgement of something that already existed. Something that had been built, carefully and without assistance, in libraries and small apartments and research rooms, and the particular interior quiet of a person who has decided to let the work be the answer. You may be in the middle of building yours right now. You may be in the part that doesn't look like anything from the outside. You may be the one in the family who is fine, who will figure it out, who doesn't need the same tending. I want you to hear this clearly. Being capable of surviving without enough is not the same as deserving less. You were not built for the secondary room. And whatever you are building in the quiet, it is real and it is yours, and when the light finally falls on it in a way that everyone can see, the only thing that will matter is that you never stopped. The light was always there. You just had to keep standing in it.
My name is Nora Jane Calloway, though I was Nora Bassett for almost 5 years and before that just Nora from a small house on the east side of Cincinnati, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where the houses are close enough together that you can hear your neighbor's television through the wall, and everyone pretends they can't. My parents were good people. Genuinely good, in the uncomplicated way that some people manage to be good without making a performance of it. My father drove a delivery truck for 31 years for the same company. My mother worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic. We were not wealthy. We were not struggling. We were the kind of family where love was expressed through meals and presents, and showing up. Where the refrigerator was always full even when the checking account wasn't. And where I never once in my entire childhood felt like a burden. I tell you this because I need you to understand what I was walking into. What I couldn't see yet. I met Marcus Bassett when I was 26. He was 28, working as an engineer at a mid-size firm in downtown Cincinnati. And we met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner at a Thai restaurant on Madison Road where the tables were too close together, and the music was slightly too loud, and somehow we ended up in the corner talking for 3 hours while the rest of the party moved around us. He was smart and easy, and he laughed at things I actually found funny, which sounds like a low bar but is genuinely rarer than people admit. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. It was simple. My kitchen, a Sunday morning, coffee not yet finished. And it was exactly right. I said yes without hesitation. What I should tell you about the Bassett family is that there is no clean way to describe them without sounding like I am editorializing. So I will try to give you facts and let you do the editorializing yourself. Gerald and Patricia Bassett lived in Indian Hill, which, if you don't know Cincinnati, is the kind of suburb where the houses have names. Not numbers, names. The Bassett house was called Claremont, though I never learned why. It sat at the end of a private lane behind a low stone wall, and the first time Marcus took me there. A Sunday dinner. 3 months into our relationship, low autumn light on the driveway. I remember thinking the house looked like it was watching me approach. Patricia Bassett was 60, when at the time I met her. She was a woman who had organized her entire existence around the performance of a specific kind of elegance. The kind that is less about beauty and more about control. She chose the restaurants. She chose the seating arrangements. She chose the topics of conversation and the duration of each one, and she did all of this so smoothly, so long practiced, that most people in her orbit never noticed they'd been arranged. I noticed almost immediately, which I think is the reason she never liked me. Gerald was quieter. Taller, silver-haired, the kind of handsome that had probably been significant 40 years ago and was now just a structural dignity. He worked in commercial real estate development and had the manner of a man who had spent so many decades being deferred to that he had lost the ability to imagine any other dynamic. He wasn't unkind, exactly, in those early days. He was remote. He looked at me the way you look at something you haven't yet categorized. Their son, my Marcus, was the person they had built their lives around. Not in the warm, loving way that some parents are devoted to their children. In the architectural way. Marcus was the structure that everything else in the Bassett family was arranged to support. He was their only child, their proof of themselves, the embodiment of every decision they'd ever made. And they had decided, long before I appeared, exactly who Marcus was going to marry. Not me. Not Nora from the East Side with the pediatric clinic mother and the delivery truck father. They never said it in those words. They were far too careful for that. What they said instead were things like, Marcus has always had a particular sense of what he wants. And, we just want to make sure he's thought this through. And, memorably, from Patricia, approximately 4 months before our wedding, you're a lovely girl, Nora. I just wonder sometimes if you've considered how different your backgrounds are. I remember smiling. I remember saying something measured and gracious because I was, at 27, still under the impression that measured and gracious was the correct response to being told you might not be good enough. I'm 36 now. I know better. The wedding was in May. It was beautiful, genuinely. I want to say that because it was, despite everything. We got married in a small garden venue in Hyde Park, 70 people, wildflowers, my mother crying from the second the music started. Marcus cried too, during my vows, which is something I have carried carefully for a long time because it was real. Whatever else was complicated, that was real. Patricia wore ivory, I noticed. I chose not to say anything. We moved into a house in the Oakley neighborhood. A rental, 3 bedrooms, the kind of solid older construction with original wood floors and a kitchen that needed updating but had good bones. Marcus's salary was good. Mine was decent. I worked as an operations coordinator for a regional nonprofit, which is the kind of job that is enormously important and compensated as though it is not. We were comfortable. Building. The problems did not announce themselves. They never do. They started small. The way erosion starts small, one particular grain at a time, so slow you don't see it happening until the ground has changed shape under your feet. Patricia called Marcus. A lot. Not remarkable on its own. Some mothers call a lot. But the calls had a particular quality. They happened in other rooms. They happened late at night. They happened, and then Marcus would come back into whatever space we'd been sharing, and there would be a slight shift in him. A half-degree turn inward. Like a compass needle recalibrating, she had opinions about our house. About how we'd furnished it. About how we spent our weekends. These opinions arrived not as criticisms, but as questions. Oh, you kept the original kitchen. How brave. And as observations. Marcus always had a more developed aesthetic. I think he might be happiest somewhere a little more. And she'd trail off, leaving the blank for me to fill in and feel wrong about. Gerald was quieter about it. But Gerald paid for things. He paid for the car Marcus drove. He paid for vacations. The Bassett family trips to Hilton Head, which I attended for 3 years in a row, and during which Patricia organized every meal, every activity, and every conversation while Gerald stood on the deck in the evenings and looked at the ocean, like it owed him something. The paying for things was its own language. I understood it but couldn't speak it. Every payment was a claim. Every gift was a tether. And because I had not grown up with money as a tool of power, I was slow to see it being used that way until the tethers had multiplied. I got pregnant when Marcus and I had been married for 2 years. I want to say that sentence without anything attached to it, and let it be what it actually was, which was one of the most purely glad moments of my life. I found out on a Tuesday morning, and I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes, not because I was upset, but because I was so overwhelmingly, unexpectedly happy that I needed to be on the ground. I called my mother. She cried. I called Marcus at work. He left immediately and came home, and we sat in our kitchen with the not yet updated cabinets and the good bones floors, and we were, for the rest of that day, simply happy in the specific, uncomplicated way that sometimes visits you before the complications arrive. We told the Bassetts at Sunday dinner 3 weeks later. Patricia reached across and squeezed Marcus's hand. She did not look at me. Gerald said, "That's wonderful news." He was looking at the centerpiece. I remember thinking, this is what this family does with good news. They wrote it back to themselves. They find the version of every story in which they are the center of it. I tried, that evening, to be generous in my interpretation. Grandparents process things in their own ways. New chapters are complicated. People show love in imperfect forms. I tried to be generous for most of the next 4 years. It cost me more than I had to spend. The pregnancy was difficult in the middle trimester. A complication that resolved, but required 3 weeks of modified activity and a particular kind of low-level vigilance that exhausted me in a way I hadn't anticipated. My mother came and stayed for a week. She cooked. She folded laundry. She sat with me on the couch and watched bad television and didn't ask me to perform okayness for her benefit. Patricia visited once, for 2 hours, during which she rearranged the items on the nursery shelves in a way she described as just making it more functional, and told me that her own pregnancy with Marcus had been completely uncomplicated. My daughter was born in October. We named her Rose. She was 6 pounds 11 ounces, and she had a full head of dark hair and her father's hands. And the first time I held her I understood, in a cellular way, the phrase, I would do anything. Just anything. Without condition or caveat. I want to be careful about what I say next, because this part of the story involves Marcus, and Marcus is not, a villain. He's a complicated person who had been shaped by complicated forces for 28 years before he met me, and some of what happened is his failure, and some of it is the failure of who he'd been taught to be. And I've spent a lot of time in the years since trying to hold both of those things, without letting either one consume too much space. What I can say is this: after Rose was born, the gravity of the Bassett family increased. Patricia wanted to be there 3-4 times a week. When I suggested, gently, carefully, that we needed some time to find our rhythm as a family, the suggestion was received in the Bassett household as a kind of aggression. I know this because Marcus came home from a Sunday dinner I hadn't attended. I'd had a headache, genuine, and sat down across from me with his hands between his knees, and said his parents were worried I was pulling away from the family. I said, their family or ours? He didn't answer. That was the moment I think I understood. Not consciously, I wasn't able to be conscious about it yet, I still had too much hope. But somewhere underneath, the knowledge was there. I understood that in Marcus's mind, those two things had never fully separated. The next year was a kind of slow negotiation that I was only half aware I was conducting. Patricia pushed. I held. Marcus stood in the middle and became, slowly, someone who spent more time managing his parents' feelings about me than his own. Gerald bought us a new car. I didn't want it. Marcus said it was practical. Patricia started coming to the house while I was at work. I know because I came home early once to find her in our kitchen, reorganizing a cabinet, Rose on her hip. When I walked in, she looked at me with a pleasantness so smooth, it was almost a provocation, and said, "I hope you don't mind." Marcus said it was fine. Marcus, when I brought it up that evening, said he thought it would make me happy to come home to an organized kitchen. I said I would have preferred to organize my own kitchen. He said I was being rigid. That word, rigid, I heard it more and more, that year, from Marcus. Occasionally through the filter of Marcus, from his parents. I was rigid. I was sensitive. I had trouble with the way the Bassett family operated. The closeness, the involvement, the love, because that's what it was called, love. Patricia's particular territorial hunger was always called love. And my trouble with it was a character flaw of mine, rather than a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. I started keeping a journal. Not with any intention in mind. Just to have a place where the version of events I actually experienced could exist unedited. I'm glad I did. I was 30, when things fell apart in the specific and irreversible way they sometimes do. Not dramatically, not with a single explosion, but with a cascade. A series of small structural failures that, in retrospect, had been failing for years. Marcus lost his job. The firm restructured, his position eliminated, and he came home on a Thursday afternoon in February looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and told me over the kitchen table. I held his hand. I told him we'd figure it out. I meant it completely. What I didn't know was that he'd already called his parents. Gerald's offer came within 48 hours. Not an offer, actually. A plan. Already formed, already decided. Marcus would come work with Gerald's development company. There was a position being created. The salary was significant. The work would be good. We would need to move, of course. To Indian Hill. Not to Gerald and Patricia's house. Not quite. But to a property Gerald owned 2 streets over. A rental, currently empty, available immediately. We would live there while Marcus found his footing in the new role. I sat very still when Marcus told me this. I asked if he'd told them yes. He said he'd told them it was very likely. I said, "When did you plan to tell me?" He said, "I'm telling you now." We talked for 4 hours. I want to be fair about this. We talked. Genuinely talked. Not fought, not performed. And Marcus said things he meant, and I said things I meant, and by the end of it I had agreed to try. Because I loved him. Because Rose was 2 years old and loved her father. Because I still believed, in whatever diminishing portion of myself still had room for it, that we were a family. We moved to Indian Hill in April. The house was beautiful, objectively, undeniably beautiful, high ceilings, a garden. A kitchen that was everything our Oakley kitchen hadn't been. I tried to experience it as what it was supposed to be, which was a good thing that had happened to us. But the rent went directly to Gerald. And Patricia had a key, and Marcus left for the office. His father's office. At 7:30 every morning, and came home changed in a way I could feel, but not prove, slightly more Bassett, shaped each day, slightly less the man who had cried at my vows in a Hyde Park garden. 6 months after we moved, Patricia knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon. She was alone. She had a manila envelope. She sat down across from me at my own kitchen table, and she placed it in front of herself. And she said, with the smooth pleasantness that I had been watching for 4 years, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." She told me, calmly, specifically, with the air of someone presenting evidence she'd been organizing for a long time, that she and Gerald had spoken with Marcus extensively about the state of our marriage, that Marcus had shared concerns, that they were worried about Rose, that they believed I had never truly committed to being part of the Bassett family, and that my resistance to their involvement had damaged Marcus in ways that were becoming apparent at work. She said Marcus agreed that a separation would be best. She said the envelope contained a separation agreement. She said that Gerald would allow me to remain in the house for 30 days. She said, and this was the part that she delivered with the most care, the most deliberate precision, that if I contested anything, if I made this difficult, Gerald would need to consider whether my non-profit employment contract might be of interest to certain parties, as Gerald knew people, and what happened to non-profit funding in this city was largely a matter of relationships. She was threatening my job, using her husband's connections to threaten the employment of a woman with a 2-year-old daughter. She sat across from me with her hands folded and her ivory, adjacent blouse and her satisfied, patient smile, and she waited for me to fall apart. I picked up the envelope. I opened it. I read it carefully. All 11 pages. I set it down. I looked at her, and I said, "Thank you for bringing this to me directly." She blinked. I said, "I'll be in touch." She waited, I think, for more. For tears. For argument. For the particular collapse she'd been expecting. When it didn't come, she stood, straightened her jacket, and said she hoped I'd be sensible about this. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. What Patricia did not know, what neither she nor Gerald nor Marcus, who had apparently discussed the terms of dismantling our marriage with his parents, before discussing them with me, had thought to look into, was what I had been doing for the past 18 months. Let me back up. When we moved to Indian Hill, I did not tell Marcus, or his parents, that I had enrolled in an online paralegal certification program. I want to be completely honest about why I started it. It was not strategic. It was not a plan. I had always been interested in law, in the structural logic of it, and a colleague at the nonprofit, a woman named Deborah, who'd worked in nonprofit law for years, before moving to operations, had mentioned the program over lunch one afternoon. I signed up 2 weeks later. I studied after Rose went to bed, 3 to 4 nights a week, at the kitchen table of that beautiful house with the high ceilings, while Marcus was working late and Patricia presumably at home, feeling satisfied with how things were going. I finished the certification 8 months before Patricia knocked on my door. But that wasn't what was in the envelope. Not my envelope. 3 months after I finished the certification, Deborah left the nonprofit to join a small family law firm in downtown Cincinnati. She called me on a Friday afternoon and asked if I'd be interested in a part-time position. 15, maybe 20 hours a week to start, helping with case management and document review while I figured out next steps. I said yes. I started the following Monday. I did not tell Marcus. Our finances were separate by then in all but name. Gerald paid the rent. Marcus handled his salary through his father's firm. I maintained my own account from my nonprofit salary, and my part-time income went into a second account I'd opened quietly at a credit union on the other side of the city. I want to be careful here. I'm not proud of all the secrecy. Some of it was self-protective instinct rather than calculated strategy. But I also want to be honest. I had been watching the Bassett family for 4 years, and I had learned, by watching, that information in that family was currency. I had learned to be careful with mine. The law firm work was illuminating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because I'd planned to divorce Marcus. I hadn't, even then. But because being inside the structure of family law, reading the documents, watching how these situations resolved, I started to see my own situation with a legal clarity I'd previously lacked. I understood, for instance, what marital assets were. I understood what documentation meant. I understood what a wife's rights were in the state of Ohio during a separation, which was very different from what Patricia Bassett seemed to believe they were. And in the weeks before Patricia came to my door, when something in the atmosphere of the household had changed, when Marcus had started coming home later, when he'd stopped asking about my day with Rose, when I'd found a credit card statement in his jacket that I wasn't meant to find, I started keeping different kinds of records. So, here is what was in the envelope I brought to the meeting with my attorney, Deborah, on the Thursday morning after Patricia's visit. Bank statements documenting 6 years of the Bassett family's financial involvement in our marriage, including Gerald's rent payments, the car, the family trips, all of which, my attorney confirmed, had legal implications for the asset calculation in our divorce proceedings. A journal, 18 months of dated entries documenting Patricia's unauthorized entry into my home, the pattern of interference, the specific incidents, the specific language used, photographs from my phone's camera roll, time-stamped, of the reorganized cabinet, the rearranged nursery, Evidence of regular presence in our home without my consent. A recording. Ohio is a one-party consent state, which I had learned at the law firm, and my phone had been in my cardigan pocket during Patricia's visit. Every word she had said. The thread about my employment, the references to Gerald's connections, the terms of the arrangement, was on that recording, and a letter from Gerald's development company's primary lender, obtained entirely legally through a contact Deborah had at the firm, suggesting that the company was currently under a financial review, related to some irregularities in a recent project filing. I'm not going to describe the divorce proceedings in detail, because they don't belong in this story. What I will tell you is that they did not go the way the Bassetts had planned. The separation agreement Patricia had brought me, which she had clearly expected me to sign in tears within 48 hours, was never signed. My attorney submitted a counter, filing within a week. Gerald's threat about my employment was addressed directly, in writing, by Deborah, in terms that made it very clear that proceeding in that direction would constitute tortious interference, a concept I had learned about at the law firm and which had a beautiful, precise weight to it. Patricia called me once during the proceedings. She said she hoped I understood what I was doing. I said I did. She said Marcus would not come back from this. I said I knew. She said some things after that which I'm not going to repeat. Not because they hurt me. I was past the point where they could. But because repeating them gives them a permanence they don't deserve. I moved out of the Indian Hill house on my own terms and on my own timeline. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Marymount, a neighborhood I'd always liked. Older. Tree-lined. The kind of place where people know their neighbors without making a performance of it. My mother came and helped me move in. We carried boxes up the stairs for 4 hours, and then ordered pizza and sat on the floor, because I hadn't assembled the furniture yet, and my daughter fell asleep on a folded blanket in the corner of the living room, and my mother and I talked until midnight about everything and nothing. It was the first evening in 4 years that I felt like myself again. Unaided, unmanaged. Just Nora on a floor in a home that was mine. The divorce settled 14 months later. The asset division was fair. Genuinely fair, not punishingly fair, not the kind of fair designed to punish. I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in my daughter, in my freedom, and in a clean account of what had actually happened. Marcus and I worked out a custody arrangement that has, with some difficulty and some grace, mostly functioned. He's a good father to Rose. Whatever he failed at as a husband, whatever he allowed to happen by standing in the middle and becoming more Bassett than himself. He loves his daughter genuinely. I've tried to hold on to that, for Rose's sake and for mine. Patricia and Gerald, I have seen them at school events. At Rose's birthday party 2 years ago, which Marcus hosted at the Indian Hill house with its high ceilings and its beautiful kitchen. I stayed for an hour. I was pleasant. I left before they had time to take the shape of something I'd need to respond to. Gerald's development company went through a difficult period during the financial review. Some projects were delayed. I did not feel satisfaction about this exactly, but I will tell you I did not feel sorry either. The part-time position at Deborah's firm became full-time 8 months after the divorce. I sat the paralegal certification exam through the state and passed on the first attempt. Deborah, who is a small woman with an extraordinary memory and the most precise professional ethics of anyone I've ever worked alongside, told me I had a mind for it. I told her I'd had good preparation. She laughed, though not because it was funny. More because she understood exactly what I meant. I am 36 now. Rose is 7, and she has her father's hands and my mother's laugh and an absolutely particular way of looking at things that belongs entirely to herself. She is the best thing I have ever done, and not because of the Bassetts or in spite of them, but simply because she exists and she is Rose. Last spring Deborah's firm took on a case involving a family in Blue Ash. A young woman, 32, 2 small children. Being pressed out of a marriage by in-laws who held the financial strings and believed, as the Bassetts had believed, that money was the same thing as power. I was assigned to her case management. I stayed late 3 nights that week. I made phone calls I didn't strictly have to make. I found one document, A single property record in a filing that had been slightly misfiled. That changed the trajectory of the entire asset calculation. Her attorney called it a catch. I just called it paying attention. When the case settled in her favor, she sent me flowers. A small arrangement, yellow tulips, completely unexpected. I kept them on my desk until they were past keeping, and then I kept the vase. I don't tell this story to make the Bassets into monsters. I've tried not to do that, and I hope you can see the effort. They were people who believed, with complete sincerity, that their version of love entitled them to control. That is not a rare belief. It causes an enormous amount of damage in an enormous number of ordinary houses. But it is not evil. It is just wrong, in the specific, correctable, consequence, bearing way that being wrong sometimes is. What I want to say to you, and I've been finding this sentence for a while, is this: there is a particular kind of person who picks up an envelope that was meant to end her and reads every page of it, quietly, and then sets it down, and looks up, and does not flinch. Not because she is fearless. Because she has already been through enough to know that fear is not the same as helplessness. You may be sitting somewhere right now, holding something you were given without your consent. A decision someone else made about your future. A door someone closed for you. A version of your life that someone rearranged while you were watching. I want you to know that you do not have to accept the arrangement. I want you to know that the thing they didn't know about you, the thing they never thought to look for, the thing you'd been quietly building at the kitchen table while they were busy being certain you were manageable, that thing is yours. They cannot touch it. It was always going to be the most important thing in the room. You just had to wait for the moment when everyone else could finally see it too.